Okay, so we're at the bottom of the page and we're learning about the vidui. And we discussed that vidui is the last part, the last element of the mitzvah of teshuvah, which is confession. And it's important that it be expressed verbally. Even though you're speaking to yourself, you're not announcing to anybody else, it's completely private. But it should be verbalized because we discussed that helps a person focus and take ownership and be more clear about what it is. But it's also important that it be specific, not just to say a general confession, but the more specific it is, the more thought that goes into it, the more meaningful it becomes to the person, and therefore the more likely that it's going to enable the person to make the necessary changes, which is what tshuva is all about. Tshuva is about making improvements, becoming a better person, and correcting past mistakes. So take a look at the, we got to discuss top of page 3, that the vidu that we recite in Yom Kippur in every one of the Amidah, every Amidah concludes with the Al-Chet, except for the Ne'ilah one, which is the last prayer of Yom Kippur before Arvit, and where we say a short version of the vidui. But this is essential because the mitzvah of Yom Kippur is really about teshuvah, and therefore every Amidah contains this list of possible sins that a person might have done, and we discussed that it's based on the Aleph Bet, 2 for each letter. They all start with the same words, Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, for the sins that we have committed, and then we specify what that sin might be. So we discussed that it seems to be strange that we recite the whole list because none of us can really say that we've done all the sins. I mean, we're not perfect, we're not tzaddikim, but on the other hand, this is not representative of who we are. And this is the question that was asked of the Rambam in the 1200s by an individual who felt that this is not a real thing to say. It seems to be like a bluff. How can I say these things when I know that I am not guilty of these things? So we discussed a couple of answers. One of them was that if you notice that the language, we say al chet shechatanu, the sin that we have committed, not for the sin that I have committed. And this is usual in prayer. We don't pray for Hashem to bless us with wisdom or with health, but rather we say chaneinu or refa'einu, grant us health, grant us wisdom and understanding. Because we all come to Hashem as a community, as an Am Israel before Hashem. So therefore, I'm not confessing necessarily my own personal sins, even though some of them very much apply to myself. But even the ones that do not specifically relate to me, I still say them in good faith and sincerely, because I am a member of a people. I'm coming to Hashem not as an individual, but as part of Am Israel. So we as a people, we confess to Hashem all kinds of possible sins, and in our people there's all kinds of individuals. There are people who are wonderful tzaddikim and tzaddikot. They are wonderful righteous individuals. There are people that are average. There are people in between. And then there are people that are far, far from what they should be, that maybe they are guilty of many, many things. So we as a people recite this. This is why it's okay to say the whole list, even though you personally have not committed all these averot, all these sins. But now I want to show you another answer that is very important, and that is the following. When we learn in the Torah that there are specific sins, those sins are basically like headings. Those are like the main category. But each category has subcategories. For example, the Torah tells us don't murder. Okay? So the category of murder is when, God forbid, somebody ends somebody else's life. That's murder. But below that, there's many other levels of actions, of crimes that be considered related to murder. For example, somebody could be an accessory to murder. Somebody can help somebody commit murder. Somebody can encourage someone to do murder. Or more than that, somebody could perhaps do another type of crime that is not physical murder, but it devastates, it hurts the person so much that the Chachamim compared that to murder. For example, the Chachamim said that if somebody embarrasses somebody in public, is as if you have murdered that person. Right? The pain is so intense. In fact, sometimes people say, I was so ashamed, I was so embarrassed, I wish if there was a hole, I jump into it, I drop dead, like, because the pain is just so horrific. So that's an example of how when the Torah tells us an Avera, murder, but there's many levels beneath that are not exactly murder, but they are like derivatives, they're like branches of that, they're lower levels of that. The same thing, for example, in stealing. So the act of stealing is if I take somebody else's property against their will. But the other types of stealing, for example, if I take somebody else's idea and I claim that it's mine. So I didn't steal a physical asset, but I stole somebody's idea. Or for example, if I wasted somebody's time, I said to you, look, I'm going to pick you up and take you to a certain place at 3 o'clock, and I came at 3:20. That means that 3:20, 20 minutes later, you wasted that time. I took away your time. And that's terrible, because if I steal from you an asset, property, money, I can always replace that. But if I waste your time, that's something that you cannot replace. So the answer to this that we had asked, how can you recite all these things? They don't apply to you necessarily. The answer is they may not apply to us in the highest level, meaning in the literal sense of the word, but it might apply to us in a lower level, in some type of variation of layer of this type of sin. I might not be guilty of murder, but I might be guilty of embarrassing somebody in public. So therefore, it is appropriate to say all these sins because each one is many, many layers below. Okay. The next thing in the notes is the idea of vidui for an unintentional sin. What does that mean? It means that we are even confessing. We're confessing for things that we have not done intentionally. We have not done on purpose. We did it by accident. So why is that something that we need to confess? I didn't mean to do it. It wasn't my intention. Well, the answer is very simple, because we're not talking about things that a person did. A person did something wrong due to circumstances beyond their control. For example, let's say a person ate on Yom Kippur because they are very ill and the doctor said that you have to eat. So that's not something wrong, that's the right thing to do, right? That's the right thing to do. Or even, for example, in the pandemic, there's certain mitzvot that we were not able to do, but that was the right thing to do because people who are vulnerable, people who are sick, should not take a risk. That's the right thing to do. So that's not what we're talking about. Unintentional means that, let's say a person forgot to do something, right? Or a person was not aware of something. So even for that we confess. Why? Because it is our obligation to be aware. Perhaps if it was something that we took more seriously, we would make sure that we would not forget. None of us forget our names, our phone numbers, our address. Why? Because that's important to us. So the idea that I forgot to do something, it's not a full excuse. It's kind of an excuse to this in the sense that, yeah, I didn't do it on purpose, but on the other hand, it shows a lack of commitment, a lack of care. The fact that I didn't know. You're right, you didn't know, but that's not a perfect excuse either, because as we mentioned, it is an obligation for us to be educated, to be knowledgeable, and so on. So therefore, we confess even for those things that we might have done without intention. And finally, so the process of tshuva has 4 different steps. We discussed that. We discussed about vidui, how it's done. But the Rambam then tells us something very interesting. So at what point can a person feel confident and comfortable with the idea that, you know what, I've done the proper tshuva. I did tshuva, the mitzvah, I did it properly. When and how does a person know that he or she has done tshuva properly? So the Rambam says something very interesting. He says like this. He says, when a person does tshuva for something, and then they find themselves in the same circumstances, in the original situation when they committed the sin, and they want to do the sin again, they're tempted, they're craving, they're able to do the sin, but they stop themselves. They say, this time I'm not doing it. I'm not doing because I'm doing tshuva on that. That's a sign that the person has changed for the better. Because the person wants to do it again. A person is tempted. They're able to commit the same sin. So why are they not doing it? They're not doing it because they really changed. That reflects that that person has completely changed. So, for example, let's say that a person is accustomed to speak lashon hara, with their friends, and he's something that's been doing. And comes the time of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the person reflects a little bit, becomes more sensitized to things. Maybe that's not the better way to be, and decides, you know what, I am gonna cut it out. I'm not gonna speak lashon hara about people. Okay, so he goes through the process. He asks forgiveness for the individual, and he makes a commitment, and he stops speaking lashon hara, and he verbalizes. Fine, everything is great. Now, is the person sure that they have reached a level of doing complete teshuvah? It depends. Let's say that person finds themselves again in the same circumstance with the same friends, and they're all comfortable, and they all want to start talking again, bashing a certain individual. And the person wants to participate. He's tempted to do so, but he holds himself back and says, you know what? I'm not doing that anymore. I'm different now. I don't want to do that anymore. That's an indication that that person has really changed for the better. So that, says the Rambam, is an indication that that person has completed the process of teshuvah. But anyway, I want to show you something else that is not in your notes, but it's just something important to do, to notice. One of the things that we confess about is al chet shechatan lefanecha vevidui peh, for the sin that we have committed by confessing. Wait a second, confessing is a sin. Confessing is a wonderful thing. It's part of teshuvah. So what does that mean? For the sin that we have committed before you, bevidui peh, by confessing with our mouth. What's the sin? The answer is very simple. The sin is not confessing. The sin is confessing with your mouth. With your mouth, you're supposed to confess with your mouth, meaning confessing with your mouth, only with your mouth. Meaning, we said the words, yeah, we said, that, let's check, but that's all it is. It's just words that we say. If there is no feeling, if there's no commitment, if there's no passion behind it, then that's a sin. That's making a joke, it's making a mockery out of the whole process. So this is what it means for the sin that we have committed by confessing with our mouth only. Okay, so I hope you got your notes, and I look forward to your questions on this unit that we've discussed.